I'm Aryeh Schwartz, along with Eli Horowitz, and welcome to the WNBA Insider Show. Each week, we cover various topics important to the W. Using X's and O's along with key stats, we bring honest and critical analysis. This week, folks, we have our first preseason power ranking, something we're really excited about, and it's obviously going to be fluid throughout the season and the preseason, deciding why this team has leapfrogged this team and so on and so forth. And it's something very exciting. The draft is over, and now we can start to get a better idea of these teams and what they're going to be. But something we want to keep in mind, why it's important to have multiple preseason power rankings, is because teams are going to cut people. A lot of people who got signed, this is spoken about a lot of times with people who follow the league. You are not guaranteed a spot in the W just because you're a first-round draft pick. Now, I don't think that applies as much to this current season just because of the talent that comes through. But now I think it starts to apply more so to the veterans in the league. What are your thoughts, Eli?
Yeah, I mean, the way I looked at this is if I had to pick today, this is kind of my order, my top 12. And, with that comes whoever you put 9 through 12, you're kind of saying might miss the playoffs. But, this is fluid because we're going to update ours almost on a weekly basis. And even in the preseason, we're going to be reading reports from training camps. We might learn that a player has an overseas commitment. We might even talk to some coaches and really learn, man, this rookie is tearing it up, that she's ready to start right away. Whereas we might learn, man, this other rookie is, it tears an Achilles. And, so this is all subject to change. So if you're listening to this, I wouldn't say, okay, we're saying 9 through 12 will definitely miss the playoffs. We're just saying today, if we had to project, and also keep in mind, this is one of the deepest draft classes in WNBA history. So we're going to learn a lot in the first half of the season as far as how much players like A'ja Wilson and Diamond DeShields and Kelsey Mitchell can have an impact in year one. And so, some of the teams we have missing the playoffs, we might very well change course within 5-10 games of seeing some of these rookies play.
Well, even to expand on that, I mean, for the young players coming into the league, it's going to be a very quick learning curve because, for instance, A'ja Wilson with the Aces, if she doesn't get it going early on in the season, that's going to be a long season for the fans and a long season for the team because it's 34 games and it's happening in a snap. This is a condensed season. So if you're going to hit the ground, you got to hit the ground running as a rookie because you don't have as much time to, prepare, study other teams, study your game to improve it. It's going to be a very quick season, folks. Action-packed, high intensity. And I mean, just looking at our list or my list and talking to you about your list, it's pretty crazy. And so, folks, we had to drop it down to tiers. Obviously, we have our 1 through 12s, but we broke it into tiers because we think just speaking to each other, there's a lot of teams that kind of fit into a bubble, but don't fit to that next level or don't fit to that lower level. So we thought putting to tiers is the best way to kind of adjust the powers of this league because, on any, as they say, any given Sunday or any given game,
Exactly. And I think we're still going to go through our specific order. So don't worry, won't cheat you on that. But we do kind of want to make it clear because, if you're going to come at us at Twitter and say you put a team 4 versus 5, I feel like at that point it's like, listen, they're in the same tier, But where the bigger argument might be like why someone was left out of an entire tier versus like 6 versus 7, if that kind of makes sense.
Oh, it does. And I know there's going to be some pissed off people when we go over our list because, I mean, to me, it's not anything shocking, but there's some teams that are, if you're a fan, you might be a little pissed off at us. So, hey, bring it on. Bring it on.
Let's get to it.
Yeah.
Let's get to it.
All right. So our top tier, my top tier, the number 1 team is the Minnesota Lynx, and the number 2 team is the LA Sparks. Eli.
I have the same 2 teams, but I flipped the order. So I have the Sparks as number 1 on my preseason poll, and I have the Lynx coming in number 2, and I agree with you that is a cutoff tier.
Yeah, I don't think any other team has really gotten to that level yet in the league. I can completely understand if someone wants to argue me and say the Sparks are the number 1. And I mean that completely based off of the offseason. The moment the season, the finals ended and the Lynx won, I said, and we talked about this a lot, Lynx are the number one team until the season starts, right? They are the defending champs. They have their core back. But then the offseason goes on, and they lose a few players to whatever it is. And then the draft, they didn't really gain much, and I didn't see any eyebrow-raising moves in the offseason. So to me, I see why the Sparks, they had a really good offseason, why they might leapfrog to the number one spot. But again, when you have Maya Moore, Sylvia Fowles, Simone Augustus, Rebecca Brunson, and Lindsay Whalen, I find it really hard, even with the Sparks going against them, to knock them down to the number two.
Yeah, and I'm kind of like you, but the opposite. Like, I'm not up in arms if you want to make the argument for the Lynx. And generally, I agree with you. Like, 9 out of 10 times when I do an exercise like this, I'm probably going to put the defending champions one. But I just thought the Sparks had such a good they added Cappy Pondexter, they added Maria Vadiva, and they didn't lose anybody of significance. Whereas the Lynx lost 4 key rotation players, the biggest of which, Renee Montgomery. They didn't have a first-round pick, so they're not really adding someone through the draft who's going to be an impact player. And so just that disparity, for me, when you know that these two teams have won the last 2 titles and they played 10 games and it's been 5-5, I just feel like for me the tiebreaker was the Sparks having the better offseason.
And I can't really argue that. I will say my hot take for this upcoming season, a way too early prediction, the Lynx and Sparks will not have a three-peat of the finals. I believe one of those teams will be there, but not both. Moving on to the second tier. All right, I have number 3 in my power ranking, the Connecticut Sun, number 4, the Washington Mystics, and number 5, the Atlanta Dream. And that blocks off my top tier. Though, to me, that tier is the tier that could jump if they progress properly this season, could jump and be in that top tier in the league and really compete against the Lynx and the Sparks.
So I have it as a 4-team tier. So this is where we differ a little bit. You have it as 3 teams. I have it as 4 teams. So I have, coming in third, I have the Phoenix Mercury, which might be a surprise to some because I haven't talked about them as much as maybe my next 2 teams. Number 4, I have the Connecticut Sun. Number 5, I have the Atlanta Dream. And number 6, I have the Washington Mystics. So for me, that is tier 2. These are teams that I believe are pretty safe to make the playoffs and that have the potential to push the Lynx and Sparks in a semifinals. But I think, they're not really contenders barring, maybe an injury to someone on the Lynx or Sparks or a midseason trade. So at this point, I call those safe playoff teams, but kind of a tier 2.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you on that. For me, and I'll be completely honest, the Mercury's game has just not sat with me well the past couple seasons. And with Taurasi getting older, I see her as a much more important clog than a lot of people. I don't want to say a lot of people give her credit for it because she's arguably the GOAT. She's one of the greatest to ever play the game. But to me, as her game declines, the team has not found a way to fill her workload so that Brittany Griner can be the dominant force that she needs to be for them to win. And again, Brittany Griner, the highest points average, obviously it was skewed because of her injury, but Brittany Griner's stats are crazy and she's still doing so well. But to be a top tier team, and to me, even a second tier team with the Suns, the Mystics, and Atlanta around now, I struggle to give it to the Mercury. And again, that's me. There's just something about their style that doesn't sit with me right.
I'm going to disagree on that one. Look, the Mercury were the 3rd best team last year in the playoffs. I know in the regular season, New York and Connecticut had better records, but in the playoffs, they went to the semifinals and they gave LA, even though it was a sweep, they gave them a run. That was not an easy sweep. I thought Minnesota handled Washington pretty easy. And then Phoenix adds Brianne January, Sancho Little, and DeWanna Bonner coming back. So you add all that together, and they got a lot better, and they were probably the 3rd best team as far as postseason-wise. So I think to me they are kind of that clear third, that team that if I think the finals will be Sparks and Lynx, but they seem like the most likely team to upend. And again, I hear you on Connecticut and Atlanta. I have them right next. And those teams maybe play a more fun brand of basketball. But this is just for 2018, and I think with Taurasi, Griner, and those veterans, at least for one more year, they're built to win in the playoffs.
Yeah, hey, that makes sense to me. So tier 4, tier 3, looking at it, I'm curious, what numbers do you have in tier 3? For me, because this is kind of where we got off track a little bit, tier 3, I have the Mercury and Dallas. And those are the teams that, to me, they have the tools to be a second-tier team, right? But I don't necessarily see them making that leap. I don't think they have it this season. I hear what you're saying about the Mercury. I'm not convinced. What are your thoughts? What is the third tier for you?
So what would that be for you, 6 and 7?
6 and 7. Mercury at 6, Dallas at 7.
So my tier 3 would be teams 7 and 8. So these are my last two in. And I have Dallas and Seattle. For me, it's Dallas. I love, that they have Liz Cambage coming. I love the pick of Stevens. We haven't even got a chance to really talk about that in depth. I mean, wow. Like, the player I said should be good, the second pick in the draft, dropped all the way to 6. So, man, if you think about a starting lineup of Diggin Smith, Alicia Gray, Glory Johnson, Liz Cambage, and Stevens, that's going to be, with Ariel Powers. But, the reason I have them 7 and not in my tier 2 is I'll be honest. I think there's some questions as far as coaching. I haven't been impressed with the schemes I've seen. Their offense is a little bit unstructured. And I think you saw in the playoffs, they just really weren't ready for that game. And I feel like there's something to prove there before I put this team into that second tier. For Seattle, again, missed opportunity. I think Canada will be a great player in this league, but they drafted her for the future. So if you think about it, like, they were under 500 last year and barely made the playoffs, and they're not really adding anybody, other than Howard and Courtney Paris off the bench. So I still think they'll make the playoffs because I think Brianna Stewart and Jewel Lloyd are going to get a lot better, but the teams ahead of them just did more in the offseason. So I think, they're going to have to battle just to get in, I think. I think people are going to be a little surprised with Seattle.
Yeah, people are going to be surprised with Seattle. I think a lot of people, especially last year, they expected to have that big jump from Seattle. My tier, I dropped the Liberty to 8, all right? And I put Seattle, just jumping into tier 4 because we're kind of meshing tier 3 and tier 4 just because of how we ranked them. So I'll just go into my tier 4. I have Liberty at 8, Seattle at 9, Chicago at 10, Aces at 11, and Fever at 12. And let me give you a little background on it. Kind of building off of what you just said. Seattle, when I first made this list, I had them at 8. I had them as a bubble team making the playoffs. And then, just speaking with you, I had to drop them because of, we talked about this before. Seattle did a great job in drafting Jordan Canada, right? But Stevens was on the board. And we were both very high on her, but even more so, I was not high on Seattle taking Canada. She's a top talent coming into the draft and a top talent that you need to take. I get that. But does she fit into the team? And I think the answer is clearly no. And you kind of said it great right there, that she's not a player that they brought in for this season or next season. She's a player for the future that they're hoping she can give some things this season and give some things next season, but not necessarily is going to be that player who, is going to really make this team next year that much better. So I think the question marks we had for Seattle are still there. That's why I don't even have them making the playoffs, right? And Liberty, I think people are going to freak out at me for putting them at 8. But, what have the Liberty really done? They got a great job with the draft, right? Kia Nurse, I'm high on her. I think she was one of the steals of the draft besides Vadiva. It's Stevens, how far she dropped. But how do you Seattle? I can't see them getting that much better with kind of not a wasted draft, but you can hear what I'm telling, right?
Yeah, no, I hear that. Look, at the end of the day, this is going to be a dogfight to make the playoffs. Other than the Fever, Aces, and Sky, who honestly could be a lot better than we think. Like, Honestly, I'd make a case that 11 teams really have a chance, at least a chance at the playoffs. I think the Fever just have too much work to be done, but I would say 11 teams at least have a fighting chance. So this is not an easy list, and I think both of us are very high on the Dream, and the Dream missed the playoffs last year. So if you think about it, we both had to take one team out that made it last year. And so I think you're saying the Storm will be that team who misses out for you, and I think that's a logical argument. I know fans don't want to hear it, but this team was under 500 last year. Literally, they were 15-19. I'm going to double check that, but I believe they were 15-19. And if you think Courtney Paris and Natasha Howard is going to take a team that was 15-19 and suddenly be the difference, I think you're mistaken. Now, if you want to make the argument, yes, they were 15-19. I just double checked. Now, if you want to make the argument that Stewart and Lloyd are going to get a lot better, and that's going to make them more of a 500 team or better, fair enough. And that's why I put them 8th, because I believe in Lloyd and Stewart will continue to get it better. But I think you make a valid point. And don't forget, Sue Bird's another year older. So I'm with you. I have them 8, but you have them 9, and I think we're, pretty similar. So for me, I'm curious your opinion. I had the Liberty 9th. They're my first team out, I'm calling it. So like I said, we both have Atlanta in, so we both had to drop a team out. I dropped out New York. Again, people are going to argue they were 3rd last year. How are you dropping them 3rd to 9th? But again, all these other teams made moves, whether it be through the draft or free agency. All the Liberty did was add Kia Nurse in the draft, who is a good pick, but she's not that kind of a game changer. To me, she's going to be more of a role player. So between all that and between the fact that they're already a team relying on veterans, I just don't think they have enough talent given what some of these other teams have done. I think they're going to be right in that mix, 7, 8, 9, 10, fighting till the end of the season, and I have them 9th.
Yeah, I mean, just real quick, Seattle, not only were they 15-19, their last 10 games, 5-5. So, they had a slight push when they got the new coach, but then that kind of fizzled out. For New York, I think it's really interesting. Often the thing that was used kind of as their Achilles, right, was, at least in our perspective, is they're playing old basketball, and they kind of, other teams have added to their repertoire of weapons and whatever, and New York has kind of stayed stagnant, and that's worked for them in many respects, right? They've been a top 5 team for the past, I don't know how many years, so that's worked for them for a certain extent. And part of me inside says Tina Charles does not let her team not make the playoffs, right? Tina Charles is too good with the talent around her to not let her team make the playoffs. But that kind of brings me to something. Originally, I had Liberty at 9 and Seattle at 8. And because when I was thinking about the draft, I dropped Seattle down. But I will say, I was going to save this to the end, my sleeper team to even jump a ridiculous amount that we weren't expecting is going to be Seattle, because the levels that Stewie can reach, we haven't seen yet, and we're going to see that more this year, and I think she's going to take a bigger burden. And then you got Jewel Lloyd, who's taking a bigger piece of the pie, and Sue Bird is slowly slowing down on the pie, right? And she's going to start facilitating for other players. So I would not be surprised if Seattle leaped to a 5-6 position even.
Yeah, and that's why I put him in. I agree with that. I mean, man, imagine if they took Stevens and they had Stewart and Stevens in that backcourt flying around with those long arms, blocking shots, sliding their feet with all that mobility, getting the rebound outletting to Jewel Lloyd and Sue Bird. I mean, I'll be honest, I think they're going to regret that.
Well, so answer me this, just a quick question. And I'll be completely upfront, I'm docking Seattle for not taking Stevens because she was on the board and they said, nah, we're not going with her, we're going Canada. Is that fair of me? Do you think it's fair for me to say that they're literally going to drop 1 to 2 spots because they didn't take Stevens?
No, I don't. I think you're being fair because I think Stevens is somebody who can contribute right away, at least defensively and on the glass. Whereas I think Canada, she's going to be backing up Sue Bird, so I don't think her minutes and impact will be as immediate. I think they drafted her as like the next point guard of the future. So I don't think she's a game changer for them in 2018. So I think it's fair to both say Canada's going to be a great player, but for 2018, you're docking them a little bit.
Yeah. No, I'm curious. What are your thoughts on the Aces? When we dove deep and when we focused on the Aces, we said, they could go much higher. They could be jumping to the single digits, and we both have them at 11.
Yeah, so I don't think I finished mine. So I have New York 9th, just missing, Chicago 10, Las Vegas 11, and Indiana 12. And Chicago, for me, is the team, like you said, Seattle. Chicago is my team that I think could really make a leap. Because when you think about it, they're adding 3 lottery picks in Gabby Williams, Diamond DeShields, and I'm counting Elena Coates, who was the 2nd overall pick last year, but this is going to be her rookie season in the WNBA. So I put him at 10th for now just because it's so early and we don't know how good those players will be right away. But I mean, if even 2 of those 3 are impact players, Chicago could leapfrog into the playoffs very easily because don't forget, they already have Dolson and Vandersloot and Quigley. So they have some good veterans already. They're not really starting from scratch, kind of like how in Indiana is.
All right. So now, just to recap, because, we've been all over the place and might get a little confusing. I'm going to go through my top 12s, or I guess my full-on power ranking of the WNBA, and then Eli's going to come in with his. So I have at number 1 the Minnesota Lynx, followed by the LA Sparks at 2, the Connecticut Sun at 3, the Washington Mystics at 4, Atlanta Dream at 5, the Phoenix Mercury at 6, Dallas Wings at 7, New York Liberty at 8, Seattle Storm at 9, the Chicago Sky at 10, the Las Vegas Aces at 11, and bottoming out at 12, the Indiana Fever. Eli, hit us with your list.
LA Sparks 1, Minnesota Lynx 2, Phoenix Mercury 3, Connecticut Sun 4, Atlanta Dream 5, Washington Mystics 6, Dallas Wings 7, Seattle Storm 8, New York Liberty 9, missing the playoffs, Chicago Sky 10, Las Vegas Aces 11, Indiana Fever 12.
And just looking at it, I mean, why don't you just give us a little bit more of why you don't think the Liberty are going to make the playoffs? Because they did finish the season on a 10-0 streak. You can't forget that.
Well, it's almost why I like if you take out that 10-0 streak, they were 12-12 last year. So, 2/3 of the way of the season, they were at risk of missing the playoffs. They were right on that border. And so I think they're going to be more that 12-12 team than they are that team that went 10-0. And then you factor in, a coaching change, the fact that they didn't really upgrade their roster because of their cap space in the way other teams did. And honestly, I think the fact that they are in Westchester and all that drama surrounding the offseason, I feel like that might count for a couple losses. The crowd's not going to be the same. The energy is not going to be the same, and intangibles matter. I know that from coaching. So I kind of see them more, like I said, I see them more that team that they were in the first half of the season.
I can't fully disagree with you on that. I think a lot of New York Liberty fans are going to go straight Brooklyn on you, so watch out. Don't show up in New York this season, Eli. But what I will say is New York is such an intriguing team. I hope that they do better because they're a fun team to watch and they have that ability to be a top team. But I got to agree with you to a certain extent. I mean, I had them at 8, and I would not be surprised if they drop lower and don't make the playoffs, even though I think they're too talented not to make the playoffs. I hear what you're saying. Let's do something a little bit more satanistic, if you will. Let's look at teams that we put on the top, 1 tier or 2 tier. Obviously, I don't think either of us think the Lynx or the Sparks are going to do this, but so let's look at the second tier. Which of these teams do you think has the most likeliness, or I guess the highest probability of just bottoming out and having a horrible season? So again, we're looking at the Suns, Mystics, Atlanta, and Mercury. I'll let you go first. I'll put you on the spotlight first for this one.
Like what's a team that's a top team that could really just drop? I'm gonna go Atlanta which some might be surprised if they listen to the pod because we've been very high on them. But look, they have to prove it. They have a rookie coach. I think everyone speaks very highly of Nikki Collin. She comes with a great track record. But at the end of the day, actually standing there as a head coach is a whole different ball game than being an assistant coach. I think Angel McCoughtry, she's a year away from playing in the league. Who knows how she'll mesh with the team. They have a lot of pieces to incorporate, and if they do incorporate it well, this is a team that could be a dark horse contender. But at the same time, you never know. Maybe it just doesn't gel, or maybe it takes more than 1 year. Lasia Clarendon really struggled to shoot the ball last year. Bria Holmes is going to be out for the season. Well, they traded her, but she was missing, due to pregnancy, and they traded her and ended up getting Monique Billings. And Brittany Sykes, she had a great rookie season, but the sophomore slump is a thing. So, again, I'm not predicting this to happen, but if I was to pick one of my kind of top teams that could just fall, it would be Atlanta.
I'm going to go completely against.
Are you shocked by that?
I'm not shocked by that. And I don't want to be rude or anything, but I think that's kind of the easy answer, right? Because they're a young team. We don't know what they have. I think we've put them up there in the top half of the league because of what we both very strongly believe is going to happen. But I think they're kind of the easiest to say that they're going to bottom out. And feel free to call.
Well, I actually have 3.
Oh yeah,
I actually have 4.
Bring it on.
I could go quick. I could make a case for 4. Well, okay. The Connecticut. Hear me out on this one. Maybe 4 will take too much time, but hear me out on this one. What do you think about the notion that what if Connecticut was that surprise team, and I think they'll be very good again. And I think Kurt Miller is a great coach, but now all the teams now have film on them, right? They were just a completely different team last year. Jonquel Jones came out of nowhere. Alyssa Thomas had a career year. Jasmine Thomas had a career year. Courtney Williams arguably had a career year. Even Strickland. So, is there an argument to be made that maybe they can't really get much better, and now the rest of the league kind of has a year's worth of film on how this team plays?
It's interesting you say that. I thought I was going to have the hot take and say Connecticut. If anybody follows me, I am high and mighty on Connecticut. But kind of what you were saying, but even more so, right? You got Shanae coming back, right? How's that going to affect the team? You got film on them. Kurt Miller, when speaking to him, very candidly told me that he didn't say worried, but just flat out, they would have less time to do some of the things that made them so good last year. Extra film review, running down player development. And those are things that are intangibles that I don't even know if you want to call them that, but those are just things that you can't discredit.
Yeah. So, I think we're both it's interesting. Atlanta, and hear me on this one. What about Washington? Because, I know you saying they could be better without Emma Mieseman because they were 8-3 last year when she was out because Della Don's able to play the 4. It's a better position for her. And if Taylor Hill comes back, I think you made a valid point when you said on our last podcast they could be even better. But they're one Della Don injury away. If Della Don gets hurt, they could easily miss the playoffs, right?
Della Don gets hurt, they miss the playoffs. Tolliver gets hurt, and they struggle to make the playoffs. Struggle handedly.
And I know you might be right. And I know you might be sitting there saying, oh, well, if any team's best player gets hurt, they can miss the playoffs. But I'm arguing Washington is uniquely set up to rely on Della Don. You know what I mean? Connecticut or Atlanta could have a key injury, but they have enough depth. I feel like Washington couldn't survive an injury to Della Don.
Well, even look at Phoenix Mercury. I think it's a great example. A lot of people would say, Griner goes down. How's this team going to survive? And they found a way, and Taurasi kind of went vintage Taurasi for a little bit. And they did bring in Monique Curry as part of an effort for that. I don't know if she came before or after the injury, but I don't think that really matters because having her really kind of help give some points while Griner was hurt. So for me, Phoenix is a similar team, but Phoenix found a way to get it done. Washington will really
Well,
struggle.
Phoenix added a lot of depth. Phoenix added a lot of pieces.
Exactly.
Though.
So what Phoenix did,
they're not as reliant as they were last year on two players.
Exactly. What Phoenix did is I think they kind of had a wake-up call last season and said, oh, crap. Like, this is what happens if Griner goes down.
Yeah. So, okay, so we kind of agree. Oh, and lastly, because we both think Seattle and New York could be struggling, but Dallas, what do you think of my take? Like, they're starting five to me, and again, I know people say don't compare to men's sports, don't compare to the NBA, but it really reminds me of the Milwaukee Bucks. You know, they have this team that's just this athletic, long, raw talent, but the Bucks could not figure out the coaching aspect and the scheme aspect, and I kind of feel like Fred Williams is kind of on the hot seat if he doesn't. You know, they were 16 and 18 last year, and they're adding Cam Beige and Stevens. I kind of feel like if this team isn't, well over 500, he could be on the hot seat. I mean, do you think they could miss the playoffs? What do you think about the coaching aspect there?
Look, I think Dallas could easily miss the playoffs. They have way too much talent, and if Dallas misses the playoffs, I'm just going to say head coach should be fired. And I'm not one, to make those claims. Hot take, right? I'm not one to make those claims, and I'm not saying, Dallas fans call up Dallas and be like, Aryeh said this, so you better fire him. No, not at all. But what I'm saying is when you have a team this talented, you need to make the gutsy calls. And I'll compare it to what Pokey Chapman did with the Indiana Fever, saying we got to trade a face of our franchise to do better for this team. And at a certain point, the higher-ups in the team need to say, hey, we need to do better. Being from Minnesota, I will say, for instance, the Minnesota Wild, they have this thing, being good is not good enough. And that needs to be the mindset of a team like Dallas Wings who have so much young talent, and then you add in, you have these vets in Skyler, Glory Johnson, and then you bring in Cam Beige. That team needs to be, in my opinion, even if they're the top 6 team, I granted this league is going to be so competitive this season, but Dallas should be a top 6 team. And if they're not, you as the owner need to, or the president or whoever's in charge of deciding Dallas, however their power scheme is set up, you need to take an honest look at your coaching staff.
Yeah, I mean, this team talent-wise, you could make a case that they're the 3rd best team in the WNBA as far as raw talent. You could make a case. Is that fair?
Definitely.
At least top 5, you can make a case. So the fact that we both have them 7, I think, shows that we are a bit less confident in the infrastructure.
100%. And to touch on what you said about the coaching is your expertise. I'm not going to get into there and say that, Fred's schemes or whatever. But what I will say is watching I think I saw 2 Dallas games live last year. And watching the playoff game against Washington, and keep in mind Washington was 6 going into the playoffs, Dallas was 7. So same team basically, right? The roster is a little bit different, but around the same spot in the league. Dallas just looked lost at times, and I don't know if I want to put that to the coaching or put that to a young team going into it. But there was definitely something that it wasn't the skill holding them back. I'll say that. It wasn't the players on the court.
I feel like that, I feel like, and it sucks. We need more coverage of this league because I feel like, people don't analyze that part of it, but it didn't look like they had a game plan. And again, that's a little unfair. Obviously they had a game plan, but it just, from my perspective as a coach, it looked like they thought they were just going to go into Washington and we're going to run on Washington and just, beat them. And when the game slowed down a little bit, it just didn't really feel like they had any adjustments in that game. And, one coach told me, and I'm not going to name them, but one coach told me in our conversations in the offseason that they're the easiest team to game plan against.
Ding, ding, ding. That's a hot take.
Well, it wasn't really a hot take. That's what the person said to me.
No, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's true. Not a hot take. But it's something that, we've heard murmurs about, but I think it's important to say, hey, that's how we're not the only ones thinking that way, right?
Right.
That's
so
really.
Anyways, I mean, I have high hopes for them, but I almost I don't know that it's just you look at that team and you're like, man, if Cheryl Reeve was coaching that team, they're probably third in my power rankings. You know.
Yeah, and this might be the season, for all we know, Fred Williams has something in mind that certain players just weren't able to do. And honestly, I hope that's true because with the talent they have, there'll be so exciting and so entertaining to watch. And the way this team moves, I think we're going to see a lot more poise from these second year players that you have, or these third year players that you have in Dallas. Dallas, again, I mean, I feel like I'm just repeating this over and over. They're so young. And the abilities or the things that they accomplished last year, they didn't necessarily, at times, they looked so much more poised and more veteran than they were.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, the schemes they used last year for, under Coach Williams, they fit better with a Stevens than like a Courtney Paris. You know what I mean? So maybe he's a coach who just kind of coaches his style, regardless of who he has, and now he'll have better personnel. We'll see. He has a career record of 117 and 136. He did take Atlanta to a WNBA Finals in 2013. He's missed the playoffs more years than he's made it, but he's been to the playoffs 4 times. Picking up this Wikipedia page, so we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm always going to play devil's advocate because that's just who I am as a person. But especially when it comes to coaches in the W, I think far too often we hold them to too low a standard, and I think we need to start holding them to a higher standard. Just in the sense of, I mean, we've talked about this, and everybody who follows the league is talking about this right now. This season is going to be just a straight, like, bare knuckle boxing match from day one to the last day of the season. It is just going to be power shot after power shot after power shot, and you have to be an intelligent and almost a chess master in this, thinking 3 games ahead. Okay, yes, we have this game, but in 2 games we're playing this team who's going to exhaust us more, so I'm going to play this person. It's so much more. This move is going to affect that move, and that move is going to affect this move, that we need to start holding. I mean, I know you and we hold the teams and we hold the players to a ridiculously high standard, and often we kind of hold punches back when it comes to coaches, but that's not going to happen anymore. I know that Eli and I have been talking about this. We have strong feelings. Like, we have our own coaches power ranking that we plan to put out in a little bit. But I just think we need to start challenging people more,
Yeah, and look, it goes for Seattle and Dallas. Those teams finished, Seattle finished 15 and 19 last year, and Dallas finished 16 and 18. So, yeah, they made the playoffs, but that's because 8 out of 12 teams make the playoffs. You have to understand, those were losing teams last year, and there's no guarantee either of those teams will be winning teams. And like we said, making a 7 or 8 seed doesn't necessarily mean you're that good of a team.
It doesn't at all. Because there's, again, look at someone like Washington. Washington went 4 and 6, limping into the playoffs. All right. Chicago, a team that Chicago went 4 and 6 also, but they dropped down to 9. They didn't make the playoffs. Then you have, Seattle 5 and 5. San Antonio finally made a late season push. They went 5 and 5. Those are all last 10 game stats. But the teams that really succeeded, Connecticut 6 and 4 in the last 10, New York 10 and 0 in the last 10. Well, they didn't really succeed, and Sparks 8 and 2, and then Minnesota 6 and 4. So I think the end season push is important, but you can't get too caught up in the last 10 games. You kind of got to look at the whole thing, which is what you're saying, right?
Well, yeah, and definitely in reference to New York. But I agree. Like this, I mean, last year there was some weak teams. Vegas, or I guess San Antonio, they were not a good basketball team. Let's just be honest. Chicago was not a good basketball team. And again, they had a new coach. They were figuring things out, but, they were not very good. Indiana was not a good, there were 3 teams last year. And Atlanta was, there were 4 bad basketball teams last year. And Seattle, like we said, Seattle and Dallas were very mediocre. And I think it's going to be the quality is just going to be a little bit higher. The talent's going to be higher. And it makes sense because there's more draft picks that are going to make teams in a typical year. And then you have a lot of key players coming back like Shanae Gumukwe, Angel McCoughtry, Liz Cambage. So that there's just going to be more talent in the league this year. Having said that, like 4 teams still have to miss the playoffs and wins and losses still have to add up to 500. So you got to imagine some of these teams are still going to struggle to get the W's.
Definitely. I mean, and it's interesting. I'd love to do a deeper dive into the possible equations of like how many teams it's possible to have winning records versus the other teams, because there's always obviously going to be a drop of that. But that's a whole nother story. That's going to be it for this week of the WNBA Insider Show. I'm Aryeh Schwartz, along with my partner in crime, Eli Horowitz. Again, this has been the WNBA Insider Show. We cover various topics important to the W. Using X's and O's along with key stats, we bring honest and critical analysis.